Yeah, so you all should have gotten a note that this training series is being recorded, so you'll have the recording later, and we'll also be able to share it with those who couldn't make it today. So yes, I'm Stephanie Roth. I'm the principal of Klein and Roth Consulting, and Rona Fernandez is my longtime colleague and a senior consultant with Klein and Roth Consulting, and I'm thrilled that she's able to lead this entire training series. She's a great trainer, and I'll say a little bit more about her in a minute, but I did want to welcome you to this. This is our very first big launch of many trainings that we'll be hosting and providing over the course of the next many months as part of the Fundraising for Health Justice program. And so it's really great to have such a great response to this training series. For those of you who are new to understanding what this program is about, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation is sponsoring, through the Voices for Health Justice program, which all of you are a part of, sponsoring a specific fundraising focus to help organizations strengthen their fundraising programs. And that includes everything from building an individual donor base, if you don't already have one, expanding your individual donor base, strengthening your foundation, grant seeking capacity and ability. You'll learn a lot more about the foundation elements of the program later. Marjorie Fine, my co-lead in this Fundraising for Health Justice program, will be leading those efforts and helping those of you who want to try to host some funder briefings and do other funder engagement strategies. But this series is basically an overview of fundraising, and we'll have today in particular a focus on individual donors, but we'll cover the foundation piece of it later. The other part of this project, as you know, is one-on-one consulting, and all of you who indicate an interest in working with a consultant one-on-one should have been introduced to someone by now, and if not, you should follow up with me or Ambar, who is out sick today, but is the one handling those assignments. And this program is going to run at least until next March and possibly through June. We're trying to get an extension with Robert Wood Johnson because it took a while to get things up and running, and we don't want to shorten the timeline more than necessary. So I want to move now to introducing Rona, if folks don't have any questions about the program overall, and I'm going to be monitoring the chat over the course of this session, so feel free to post questions there. So Rona Fernandez, as I said, is senior consultant with Klein and Roth Consulting, and she and I go back, I was trying to remember, Rona, at least 15 years, maybe 20. And she's been working with Klein and Roth Consulting for quite a while. And before that, she really cut her teeth, as they say, in community organizing. And I think her community organizing background, which she'll say more about, really provided her with a great way of understanding fundraising as organizing, and understanding that by integrating and having your fundraising be integrated with your program and your organizing work really strengthens both. And you'll learn more about that over the course of today. She's a great trainer, has an amazing range of experience working with groups from small grassroots all volunteer organizations to organizations that have multi-million-dollar budgets. So she has quite a bit of experience, and all over the country as well. Both Rona and I are based, by the way, in the San Francisco Bay Area, Oakland and Berkeley, but have worked nationally. So I think I will turn it over to Rona. Thank you so much, Rona.
Thanks, Stephanie, and thanks everyone for being here. Rona Fernandez, she, they pronouns. I'm in Oakland, California. As Stephanie said, I've been doing fundraising for a long time. I got these little hairs, which are blue actually, but the blue is to cover the gray because, you know, we're all getting a little older, but trying to look stylish while we do that. And today, just to make sure you're in the right place, this is the Fundraising Basics Training Series. It's session number 1. So as Stephanie said, this is the first session. And it's called Fundraising is Organizing, but it really is about just the overview of successful individual donor fundraising and how that could work for your organization that does advocacy or organizing or any kind of social change work. And so if you haven't already, if you could take a second and just introduce yourself in the chat, pronouns, name, location, or organization, I think a lot of people are doing as well. And just how you're doing today. You know, I know it's still kind of a funky time in the world for various reasons. And, you know, I always tell people this is your time. If you need to like have video off, if you need to step away for a moment, whatever you need to do to take care of yourself, please do that. Let us know how you're doing. I'm a little bit tired, I'll be honest. I've been having some sleep issues, as I'm sure many of us are, but I'm caffeinated, I'm ready to be here for you, and I'm really excited about working with you all, and excited to see the breadth of groups all over the country, and just get started on, kind of connecting on that level. So please go ahead and share who you are in the chat, pronouns, location, organization if you want, and how you're doing today. And I also wanted to ask a couple other questions, since I saw that there's a lot of leadership staff in the participant list. So Avery, if you could pull up a couple the polls that I gave you, and if folks could answer these questions, just to give me a little more information about what your fundraising program is like now, and how much experience you have. So the poll should be coming up soon.
My apologies for not introducing Avery, who's our tech person, by the way, and is available to you if you have any problems with your tech, and
Yes.
she'll be here throughout the training. Sorry, Avery. Thank you for your.
No worries. Here we go.
Any tech needs you have, please chat Avery. So while Avery's pulling that up, just to say a little bit more about myself. So Stephanie said, I have a community organizing background, specifically around racial justice. I worked for a long time with a group called Californians for Justice here in the Bay Area, which was a racial justice group that first started out as an electoral project. So we were a PAC and C4, and did a lot of fundraising from individuals because we had to, because we couldn't get foundation money. And then we morphed into a C3 that also has a C4 and a PAC, and began to do more work around education, public education, and how students of color are treated, and the barriers they face in public education in California. So that's a little bit about my background. So the poll, there's 2 questions up there, if folks could take a minute to respond. So the first one is, how much experience do you have fundraising from individual donors? So, if you're like, I don't know what individual donors are, which I'm sure you all do, but I had to throw in a joke answer there, but it's a valid answer. Is it less than 1 year, maybe 1 to 4 years, or more than 5 years of experience? So how much experience do you as an individual have from raising money from individuals? That can be paid, work with your organization. That could be as a board member, as a volunteer. So it doesn't have to be with the organization that you're representing today. Then the second question is, how many, approximately, I know you might not know the exact number, but approximately how many current donors does your organization have right now? Just to get a sense of like where you all are starting from today. So is it less than 100 donors, between 100 and like 499-ish, 500 to close to 1,000, or more than 1,000? And if you're not sure, that's totally fine as well. You can click that answer. So folks could take a second and answer those poll questions. Just give me a sense of who you are, what your organization's sort of dealing with right now, and where you are in terms of individual donor work. And so if it's not clear already, this session today is going to focus on individual donors. The series overall will also touch on foundations and lots of other aspects of fundraising, but today's session is on individual donors. There could be some things that, if this is something that you're very familiar with, that might be, kind of applicable to foundation fundraising stuff around relationships. But really the focus of our work today is going to be on individual donors. So hopefully that's what you signed up for. All right, so whenever you think you're ready, you got the last one in. Avery, go ahead and share the results.
All righty.
Thank you. Da, da, da. Okay, so we have a lot of people with a good amount of experience, over 5 years, and then about a third of you have between 1 and 4 years, and another maybe less than 20% have less than a year. I'm glad to see you all know what individual donors are, which I'm not surprised by that. And in terms of the number of donors your groups have, about half of you have less than 100 donors. Okay, a quarter of you have between 100 and 499, and then some of you have maybe like another 25% of you have over, or I'm sorry, 17% have between 500 and maybe 1,000, and some not sure. Okay, so that's helpful, just to see like where you're at. And so just to give you a preview, thank you for doing that poll, and thank you, Avery, for that support. just to give you a sense of what we're going to do today. So we're going to discuss our money stories, which may be an exercise that some of you have done already, especially if you have been to any of the trainings that Klein and Roth has done or other groups that are kind of in our social justice fundraising world. I know this exercise is very popular, but I think it's always good to do it again. So we'll do it today in pairs. And then we're going to explore kind of the context, excuse me, the context and the landscape for fundraising right now, because it's changing a lot and there's some really exciting things going on and also very scary things going on. So just want to ground ourselves in what's actually happening in the current moment. And then we'll spend a bunch of time really digging into what we consider the 5 elements of successful individual donor fundraising. And that's the case for support, building strong relationships, choosing the right strategies, teamwork, and infrastructure, which is things like your CRM, staffing, budgets, that kind of thing. So that's going to be a good chunk of the afternoon. And then, I'm sorry, the second hour. And then we'll also, as part of that, you will have time to practice making the case for your own group. So kind of coming up with your own pitch. We're not going to fully do like an ask today. That's going to be the next session with Wanda on the 29th. But this will be a nice preparation for you to go into that session with Wanda on major gifts and donor solicitation with something already prepared. So that's what we're going to work on today. Let me stop and see if there's any questions or comments. Is anybody thinking this isn't really what they signed up for today? Any comments or concerns? Anything coming up in the chat, Stephanie?
Yeah, there's nothing so far in the chat. I did want to just comment on, there's a lot of experience in the room here. I can see from people who've been doing work for over 5 years. So we both welcome, your stories and insights, which obviously Rona will invite, but I just want to appreciate that. For some of you, this may really be review.
Yeah, and you all have experience and feel free to weigh in with your perspective on things. I mean, Stephanie and I have experience, but we don't know everything. We never claim to know everything or know the right answers to everything. Often there's several right answers to a particular question, right? It just depends on the situation or a group's mission or alignment of values. And so we welcome, definitely other points of view and other answers to the questions that folks might have. So there's no more questions, just about, kind of what this is going to be about today and what we're covering. I'd like to share with you, or Stephanie's going to share in the chat, a link to, it's like an interactive slide deck. It's like a little workbook, basically, that you're going to have access to. And you'll have access to this through the entire series. So just think of this as like a place where you can put your notes. And the thing is, everybody else will also have access to it. So be mindful of what you may want to share here, that if it's private, you might want to make a copy of this Google slide deck and make it private just for yourself. But I just made this one available to everybody. And on slide 2, it should be slide 2 there, slide 2 and 3, actually, there's just a question like, what do you want to get out of this training series? So not just today, but like this whole training series starting today and going through mid-October. What are you hoping to get? And it can be, you can write more than one thing, obviously. It can be what you want to get out of today. Maybe it's that you really want to learn how to ramp up your individual donor strategies, right? Or maybe you want to learn how to write better grant proposals, or leverage more of your relationships with funders, whatever that is. So go ahead and click in that document or that slide deck. And again, go to slide number 2. And I actually can't access looking at that slide deck from here. So maybe Stephanie could give me a little update about how that's going as people fill out that slide. And let Avery know if you're having any problems getting in there and editing stuff.
So far, we just have about 8 people have logged in.
Okay.
You want me to read some of the things people are writing?
Yeah, if it's
Okay.
whatever's interesting to you.
Yeah. So we have just getting back into the fundraising arena and want to learn how to build a major donor program, fostering and maintaining relationships with funders, how to expand our individual donor program or donor base. Great. These are all good things. How to network with new funders. Want to learn how fundraising has changed for someone who just got back into fundraising. How has fundraising changed? And the funder briefings. Yeah, some people I know are very interested in the funder briefing piece of this, which will be starting up next month. Workshops about that. Increase fundraising KSAs.
KSAs, can someone, whoever wrote that, what's a KSA? I'm not familiar with that term.
I'm not either.
Knowledge, skills, and abilities.
Oh,
I
great.
thought it was some fancy technical tool I didn't know about yet. I like that. Knowledge, skills, and abilities. Thank you. Okay.
Here's one. I'll just
adding?
read a couple more. Building a more robust individual giving program. We've let it slide. I know how that can go. Let's see. Understand all the documents that are needed for grant seeking. How to expand our donor base, sustainability. Yeah, some of these are a little harder to read. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Took
Cool.
me
So
like-
this will be up here. And if you want to add stuff later, but I'm also leaving it up here so that at the end of the series, you can go back and say, oh, did I actually learn the things that I wanted to learn? And hopefully you did. And hopefully you also learn new things or gain new KSA, as someone shared, through your coaching sessions with your individual consultants if you've signed up to use those hours. So thank you for doing that. And you can go ahead and keep that slide deck open because we're going to use it again today in our session together. And so now we're going to dig into the content of today. And I'm very interactive. I know Stephanie is similar to me. Klein and Roth, our trainings tend to be very interactive. So hopefully you weren't planning to just sit here and listen to me talk, because that's not going to happen. You're going to talk to each other. You're going to ask questions of us. You're going to have a lot of chance to kind of delve into your own stories about money and your own reasons for why you want to fundraise for your organization. So I like to do this exercise pretty early on when I work with groups, because I feel like money is such a fraught, issue for a lot of people, right? It can have a lot of stress related to it. It can also be something that's very joyful and bring a lot of happiness, obviously, when we have a lot of access to it, or when we feel empowered by our money and when we raise money for our organizations. But the way we feel about money as on an individual level often has an impact on how we feel or how we're able to do fundraising for our organization. So I like to start doing this exercise pretty early on. And we're going to have you go into pairs in a second, but I want to share with you the questions that I'm going to have you answer. And actually before that, let me share my money story with you. So the two questions I'm going to have you ask are, what is your earliest memory of money? And did your family talk about money when you were growing up? And if so, how often? What were those conversations like? Just to kind of jog your memory a little bit around how money was talked about in your family when you were growing up. But my money story, because it's related to this little Coke bottle picture in the slide here, is my earliest memory of money was when I was probably about 5 years old. I think I was about 5 years old. And I used to go with my mom, who was a single mom. She was a hairstylist, and she worked in San Francisco in this very cute little boutique-y kind of street. And I went with her sometimes on the weekends, and I didn't have a lot to do. And her ladies, as she called her clients, would have me make instant coffee for them, because this is way before Starbucks or Peet's or any of that stuff. And so we had a, little, I don't even know what they look like now, little coffee maker. I guess it's just a hot water pitcher and then some instant coffee crystals. And I would make them a lot of coffee and put cream and sugar, whatever their order was. And then I would bring it back to them and it would give me quarters. And then I would save up my quarters and go buy the glass bottle, like the good Coke, at the liquor store down the street. And I was so excited to buy something with my own money that I just earned. And then I would drink it. And then I was even more excited when I found out I could bring it back for a deposit, right? And actually get 10 cents for, bringing it back to the liquor store. So that was my earliest memory of money. It was like my first little hustle as like a coffee, 5-year-old barista in my mom's shop. And I think it did set the stage for me to become a fundraiser in some way, because I saw how easy it was to kind of just do some small service and people would pay you for it. So that's my first earliest memory of money. And so what I'd like to do now is have you guys break into pairs. Actually, before I do that, any questions about these questions or about the exercise, about what I'm asking you to do?
Can I just add real quick, Rona, that when you're going to, I know most of you have your videos off, which is fine. When you're in these breakouts, though, it's really better to have interactions when you're on video. So hope you'll be willing to do that if it's at all possible. And I also wanted to add about the money stories. Not everyone's money story is going to be all positive. I know Rona's was kind of a fun one, but just it's fine if your money story is that your family fought about money, or that, you know, you didn't feel like you ever had enough money, or whatever it is. So just wanted to add that too.
Great. So now we're going to break you into groups of 2, or there might be one group of 3 if we have an odd number of people. So Avery's going to go ahead and do that. And then I will message you the questions again when you're in your breakout room, so you remember what they are. Earliest memory of money. Did your family talk about money growing up? How did they do that? What were those conversations like? And again, there's no right or wrong answers, like Stephanie said. It's just an exploration of, you know, what our histories are with money. All right, good luck, have fun. So we can just get started as people start to return. How was that? I'm just curious, like, if we just take a few comments about what that was like to talk about that, what that kind of brought up for you. Any of you can just raise your hand, or you can just unmute if you'd like to share how that was for you. You can also put it in the chat. Anyone want to share how the money stories exercise was for you?
It brought
Sure.
back, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Melanie.
It brought back some, and like you said, not everybody has positive memories of money. It's kind of traumatic talking about money. It brings back a lot of trauma and anxiety.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. And of course, we don't want to make people traumatized, but unfortunately, when we don't talk about how it affects us, it comes up anyway. So I find it's helpful to at least be aware, right? So thank you for being willing to participate.
Yes. Go ahead, Kayla.
Oh, I'm sorry. For me, what it did was it really helped me associate some of my earlier spending habits and financial practices with the lack of knowledge that was passed down as I was growing up. The lack of me seeing like a budget within my household translated into me not having a budget as an adult. The inconsistency with chore money being provided, like us starting the chore system, then stopping it, and picking it back up. That it translated into inconsistencies at times. I guess with financial practices.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Kareem, did you want to speak?
Sure, and I guess for me, it gave an opportunity to learn about cultural differences. When managing money, how different families, different cultures, or different support systems view it, and then also how that affects, how it affects our budgetary choices. Getting lines of credit, student loans, etc. As we move forward, and then I guess developing a plan, or giving you that insight into developing a plan, so that future generations don't have to go through the hurdles that you did in terms of like that learning process, so they have a leg up.
Yeah, so it's fair to say, and I know that only a few people shared, but it's fair to say probably that money can bring up a lot of stress, right? Money can be very difficult to talk about. It makes sense in our capitalistic society that it can be fraught with a lot of things, like I said earlier. And so it's just good to be aware of these things. It's not like, today in this training, we're going to like overcome all that, that's not going to happen in today's training, or in years maybe. And actually Wanda Scott, who's going to do the next training in 2 weeks on major gifts and direct solicitation, one-on-one solicitation, is going to delve into this a little bit more. But I just ask you to kind of hold the awareness of this in your minds and your bodies, like just that this is what you come to the table with around money. So if you're ever feeling, kind of tense, or like, just like, I don't want to do this, or resistant, like that probably comes from someplace very valid. It's not like you're weird, or that you don't know how to do your job, or there's something wrong with you. There's just a lot of stress and trauma around money in our society in general, and especially for a lot of folks who didn't grow up with very much, or who had very tense family relationships that had to do with money. So, and then one question I want to leave you with, we won't talk about it today, but just to leave you with for the next time when you meet with Wanda in 2 weeks, how do you feel like your money story, your personal money stories, affect your ability or your willingness to do fundraising, right? Is there a connection between the two? Is there a way that fundraising makes you feel that might come from this history that you have? So just something to think about. We're not going to explore that today just because of time, but just something to think about, since we are, the focus of this series is fundraising, right? But money obviously is a big part of that. So thank you so much for being willing to do that with me, with sharing that with each other. And again, like I said, Wanda's going to revisit this question a little bit in a different way in 2 weeks. And we'll continue to kind of explore this, this question together and how it affects our ability to fundraise for our groups. So in that, from going from there, one thing I also want to emphasize is that, you know, there's going to be a lot of information shared with you today. There's a lot of folks here who have a lot of experience, but you already know a lot, even if you don't have a ton of experience, because more than likely, I would guess that all of you, if not 99% of you, are donors, right? So you already have a sense of what it takes to get someone to give money, because someone's asked you at some point and you may give a gift, you felt compelled to give a gift. You know how you like to be treated as a donor. So just always remember, when you feel like you don't have a lot of information, you don't have the right answer for the question you're looking for, think about your own experience as a donor and how that can inform, or even maybe have you answer your own question you have about what's the right way to fundraise. And I do want to get into a little bit of context too, just sort of specific context for the moment that we're in right now around fundraising in 2022 in the United States. These are going to be just some observations I have about what I see are the trends and kind of the context that we're working in right now, but they're not like the end all be all, you know. And so I welcome you to also share your own observations about what you're seeing out there in the world. And you all are out there, you know, as executive directors, development staff, board members, helping to raise money for your groups. You're seeing different things than I am. So definitely please feel free to you know, to come off mute, to put in the chat other trends and kind of observations you're having about what fundraising is like right now. So of course, as we are coming out of, or still in, depending on your perspective, this pandemic, this global pandemic of COVID, we've had this major kind of surge of giving in response to the crisis, right? The crisis of COVID, the crisis of police brutality, the crisis of anti-Asian hate. There's so many different things that have been coming at us for the last few years, and donors have really responded with huge outpourings of generosity. At the same time, we're, you know, almost 3 years now into the pandemic specifically, and I sense a little bit of crisis fatigue, right? Partially, I don't think that we as human beings are built to just sort of deal with crisis after crisis after crisis endlessly, being bombarded by it 24/7. It wears on you, right? It gets really tiring. And so I think it's important for us as fundraisers to keep that in mind. And I think there's a tendency in fundraising often to try to kind of feel like everything's a crisis, right? Or to like make everything seem very urgent. And that's also how social media and the media in general are kind of like talking to people all the time. And I think we're in danger a little bit of sort of like crisis fatigue, or just making people a little desensitized to, you know, really what's important or what's really awful out there, because there's so much of it. So I don't have the solution to this, but it's just something that I've been thinking about and something I'm seeing, and something hopefully, you know, you are working to try to figure out how to fix or how to deal with in your own fundraising work. Another thing I'm seeing is, and probably all of you are too, is obviously like worsening wealth and income inequality. You know, some of us were hoping that during the pandemic, there would be some equalization of like some awareness that, you know, our system shouldn't really work this way. It should work more for the good of all and not just the good of few. But we know that there are, you know, multi-billionaires that got even wealthier during the pandemic, and companies, corporations who benefited tremendously off of, you know, not sharing vaccine technology and that kind of thing. So this is not going away. If anything, it's getting worse. And it's something that we need to be aware of as fundraisers, because we're asking people for money that they might use for some other purpose, right? And I think it's something to be aware of, that a lot of, especially middle class, even upper middle class folks who 10, 20 years ago might have more disposable income to share with us in their generous gifts, maybe don't have that kind of income anymore for various reasons, because the cost of living is so high, because, you know, they're taking care of their college age kids who came back home, you know, after they went to college, whatever it is. Our folks are really getting squeezed, right? Because they're not the 1%, a lot of the donors we're talking about, and they're not the people that are making tons and tons of money off of this unequal economy. So just want to stop there and see if there's any comments, like reactions to this, or other observations people are having about what the landscape is for fundraising right now in 2022.
Rona, I'd like to just add in terms of this income and wealth inequality. that one of the data points that we're seeing in the research that's done on fundraising is that there's been a pretty significant drop in the percentage of households who give away money. So when I started in fundraising 30 years ago or so, somewhere between 70 and 80% of all adults in the United States gave away money in some form. And now the research is showing that that's dropped to somewhere between 50 and 60%. It depends on the study. That is a really serious decline because the bread and butter of so many nonprofits was just regular people, working class people, middle class people, even poor people. So I think that's part of the result of this big gap that is just stretching people a lot, and they feel like not just that they can't afford to give, but that their gift doesn't make that much difference. They read about, you know, a $1 billion donation and they're
Right.
thinking, what is my $25 gift going to do?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, and that's a really good segue into my next
There's
observation.
one other person has their
Oh,
hand.
sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Sheena. Oh, you're on mute, Sheena.
Yep, sorry. Hi
Okay.
there.
Hi.
I was going to your initial question of how are people looking to fundraise today. I did come across an article about Girls Who Run, that organization, and what they're having individuals do is ask people around them to donate to that individual's either their cause or what, you know, say they're going to ride 10 miles on their bike this week to raise awareness or money for people with asthma. And so, you know, what they're doing is trying to raise money for physical health. I think primarily for young girls and teens, and really do health promotion that way. But they're having individuals ask those around them to give to that individual, and then that individual would then raise awareness and take that money towards the cause of their choice. So I think that's kind of a popular way, because to your point, individuals are not giving as much. They're not just saying, okay, here's my credit card, here's my Cash App, I'm going to give to United Way because I like the work that they do. So I think fundraisers are really trying to look for a niche, and that is now having individuals ask their circle of people.
Mhm.
So I think it seems to be working. I've had a couple of folks that I know, they're raising money through wine sales for the cause of their choice. And I mean, you know, most people, if you're into wine, okay, you know, I'll buy an overpriced
Not a hard
bottle
sell. Yeah.
and it's going towards a good cause. Okay, so
Yeah.
I think those are pretty clever ways that they're kind of trying to change the fundraising landscape.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's really important. I think that's something that as fundraising consultants, we often advise people to do is like, how can you expand the number of fundraisers that are asking for money for your organization, right? Because this kind of fundraising, individual donor fundraising, the way it's different, and one of the ways it's different from foundation or government funding, is you actually do need a team of people. And we'll get to that more in a second. But so that to me is a good example, Sheena, of this group really, you know, sort of leveraging the existing relationships they have and getting those folks to fundraise for them. And I think it also relates to the next observation I was going to share, which is, so as much as, you know, it's true that Stephanie's saying that less people are giving to nonprofits, I'm not really convinced that that means people are giving less, period. Like, because if there's these, you know, direct funding, right? Direct to an individual, direct to a private, you know, company, platforms that have grown tremendously over the last 10, 15 years. So there's Patreon, which I'm actually on Patreon. I have patrons on Patreon, Indiegogo, GoFundMe, where people can give directly to an individual person or a specific creative project. You know, this used to be the purview of nonprofits in a lot of ways. Like an artist might have to go through a museum or go through another nonprofit to get a residency or some other way to support themselves financially. And that's just changing drastically. And some people would say for the good, right? Because then the money is going directly to the people who really need it versus to the overhead and all that kind of stuff. I don't see it as a either or thing. You know, I think we need nonprofits because nonprofits can get things done on a different scale than individuals can. But I also think the democratization of fundraising and how allowing anybody to be able to fundraise for whatever cause they want, whether it's funeral expenses when someone they love is killed, you know, versus like a creative project that they want to do that's a one-off thing. They don't want to start a whole organization around it. So there's lots of options now that people have to fundraise that don't necessarily go through the traditional nonprofit structure. And then another thing that I want to end on, because I think it's a hopeful thing. So despite the income inequality, despite all the horrific things that are happening in the world, I'm definitely seeing a much greater awareness and of the need for funder and donor accountability and reparations. And, I've been hearing the word reparations and community with folks who are doing reparations work for 25 years. And I've never heard it talked about more often than I have now, right? And that's a huge thing. That's not a small cultural shift. That's a huge cultural shift that has a lot to do with Black Lives Matter and the work that activists have been doing for decades around lots of these issues. Some of the images I put here on the slide are is from Segurate Land Trusts. They talk a lot about rematriating the land, which is bringing it back to kind of native control, or not even control is not the right word, native stewardship, or stewardship in a way that is in alignment with nature and with life, right? Rather than exploitation and kind of this extractive way of using land. So there's a lot of things going on in the world that are very exciting. I do a lot of work on capital campaigns in my consulting practice, and I've been surprised to see how many donors, both donors who give lots of money and donors who are in the mid-range of donors, are really interested in helping organizations buy land, buy property, have that stability of a building or a piece of land that they can really call theirs. So, so that's what I'm seeing in this landscape. And I wanted to end again on a hopeful note, because I think that as much as the trauma and the unrest of the last few years has been challenging in some ways, it's also paved the way for a lot of really exciting, ambitious conversations about how we can really change the society. So any other kind of like comments, questions, anything else that folks are noticing out in the world of fundraising? We're going to get into a few more statistics, but any other like just trends you're seeing? And don't worry if you don't have the perfect stats to back it up. This is just more like your opinion about what's out there. Nope. Anything in the chat? Okay, great. Awesome. So we're going to go on and just talk a little bit about some information you probably already know. So where does nonprofit funding come from? So nonprofits in general, where do they get their money from? And there's a lot of nonprofits, as you can see from this slide, and they generate over $1 trillion in revenue from basically 3 big pots of money. So one is the government. About 1/3 of nonprofit revenue comes from the government, whether that's state or local or federal. How many here, actually, just if you could just raise your hand or give me an emoji, how many groups here get some government funding? I'm curious. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, a lot of you. Yeah, at least half of you. Yep, that makes sense given the kind of work that you do. And then earned income is actually the biggest chunk of funding for nonprofits. So earned income, can anybody tell me what earned income is in terms of nonprofit revenue? What's earned income mean? You can just unmute or throw it in the chat.
It's selling things like tickets, or if I used to work in museums, so like ticket sales, gift shops, program fees, things like that, things that aren't actually tax deductible.
Right. Yeah. Selling things, like an arts group might have ticket sales, or they might actually sell art itself, that kind of thing. Hospitals that are nonprofits would charge fees to patients who come and get services there. So, and again, this is all nonprofits, not just little ones. I mean, there are huge institutions that are nonprofit organizations. And so earned income is about half of what all nonprofits get their, on average, get their income from. Then there's this 20% that comes from the private sector. And that's what we're going to talk about today. That's foundations, corporations, individuals. And folks have probably seen this visual from Giving USA that comes out every year. This is a kind of a research organization and philanthropy that does a report every year called Giving USA. It might be a little hard for you to see on the slides, but I was trying to make it look bigger, but I kind of failed. But can anyone read how much foundations give in terms of this? This is just the private sector's giving, right? So there's 1.1 more than $1 trillion that gets generated by nonprofits in general. And then of that, 471 billion is from the private sector, right? Which again is individuals, foundations, corporations. Can anyone read to me like how much percent does foundations give of that 471 billion?
That's just 19%.
19%. Yeah.
88.55 billion.
Mm-hmm. So just under 20% is from foundations, which is about consistent. It's usually between like 13 to This is actually pretty high. I know numbers in the past have been more like 13, 14% have come from foundations. And then corporations give about 4%, which makes sense because corporations are not really in the business of giving money away, right? They're in the business of making money, making a profit for their stakeholders and their owners. And then how much do individuals give away? Does someone else want to read that number? How much do individuals give away of that $471 billion?
69%.
69%, right, which is up a couple points from a year ago. So individuals are still giving. The majority of private income is coming, private donations are coming from individuals. But, you know, as Stephanie said, who those individuals are, probably a lot more of them are people with a lot of wealth, because it's getting harder and harder for people of middle and lower income classes to give, although we still do. So it's just good context to have, right? These numbers tend to fluctuate a little bit year by year, but not fully, not a lot. The other number I want to draw your attention to is the giving by bequest. So does anyone know what a bequest is? Can anyone tell me what a bequest is?
Planned giving, so giving that comes through wills, whether it's or other estate planning devices. I'm not going to go into all of that because
yeah. So it's when people pass away, essentially, when people pass away and have planned for their estate, their assets to be transferred to a nonprofit after their death. That's what bequest is. So bequests are also a form of giving from individuals as well. So if you add up 69% and 9%, it's closer to 78% that's coming from individuals of this private sector money. Okay. So that's probably all repetitive to you, but just want to see if there's any like comments about this, questions, concerns about this information. Is this surprising to anybody, or is it pretty much you?
I wanted to ask that, like, if people could say if these numbers are new to them. No, not so much.
Yeah.
Again, another, just to put it in perspective, that individuals used to give away closer to 80%. And the reason the foundation giving is up is not so much that foundations have become more generous, but people are giving to foundations to set up donor advised funds. So a lot of giving you'll probably notice in your own fundraising is coming from donor advised funds. You'll learn more about that at a later training, but it is a shift. The money still is coming from individuals who set up funds that then go through a foundation or some other charitable giving entity. So it's still important to recognize how much individuals really hold up the nonprofit sector.
Yeah. And this is just a breakdown of where the money goes. So, you know, religion definitely takes the largest share. Education, human services, foundations, as Stephanie mentioned, public society benefit. Health is actually, I thought it would be much higher, but it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's the sixth one down. So this gives you a sense of like, you know, where the money is going. So just a few more statistics. I think this actually might be wrong according to Stephanie, the stat that Stephanie gave now, but most people, I would say most people still give money. Are they giving money to nonprofits? That's the question that I think is not quite answered. I'm not sure if there's research on that. They may be giving to people individually through mutual aid work and that kind of thing. Most donors give away to multiple groups. So it's not like we only give to like 1 or 2 groups. We give away to multiple groups each year. And despite all the gloom and doom we just shared with you, people of all income levels and races and genders are still giving money, because that's how we express our generosity and our desire to change the world, right? So any questions so far? And then we're going to take a break, but just want to see if there's any questions so far about anything we covered. I know for a lot of you, this might be review. Also, like I said, very much welcome any additional perspectives and observations you want to share. But yeah, any questions or comments people have at this point before we take a little break?
There's a comment in the chat.
Oh, Stephanie saying that she concurs that people are probably still giving, but just not as much to nonprofits. Yeah, thanks. Any other questions or comments? What are folks seeing? I'm just curious if there's any other like trends or, and I know people are probably thinking of the recession that we keep hearing about. That's probably going to be coming soon. And that's definitely on, you know, on my mind and probably on your mind as well. Anything else that you're thinking about that we should just be aware of as we're going into this conversation about raising money from individuals? Okay, well, if there's nothing else, we're going to take a quick 5-minute break. So actually, let's do a 3-minute break. It's 11:02 right now. We'll come back at 11:05. And then we'll dig into the elements of fundraising and you'll work on your case or your pitch. Sound good? All right, so we'll come back in 3 minutes and I'll put a little timer up for you to see. Okay, so sorry that break was a little short. We were running a little late from the earlier hour, but we will get you out on time, I promise, today. So now we're going to delve into what actually makes up a successful individual donor program. We're going to focus on a couple of aspects of this, especially the case for support. So hopefully this is all familiar to you all as well. And if not, please feel free to ask questions. Definitely no dumb questions, no questions that aren't important. And if you have a question, there's probably someone else in the room that also has the same question. So the 5 elements of successful donor fundraising are having a strong case for support, which is basically your pitch or like what you're asking for, how you make the case that someone should make a donation to your group. Strong relationships, so having relationships with donors, building those relationships over time, having the right strategies, so picking the right strategies that fit with your capacity, with your mission, with the goals that you have for your fundraising campaign or your fundraising activity. Teamwork, as I mentioned earlier, it's really important for this kind of fundraising to have as many people as possible involved in some way. Whereas with grant fundraising or government fundraising, you can have maybe a small team, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 people writing grant reports, collecting the data and writing the proposals and getting the funding. This kind of fundraising really requires a bigger team of people to go out and ask people for money. And then infrastructure, which we won't spend much time on today, but that's things like your database, ways to keep track of donor information, a plan, having plans for your annual fundraising, having evaluations for those plans, staffing, do you have enough staffing to carry out an individual donor program? So it's often overlooked, but I think infrastructure is really kind of the glue that holds everything together. It's kind of the skeleton that keeps the body of the fundraising kind of moving and gives it some structure. So those are the 5 elements, and we're going to start today with the pitch or the case for support. So what the case does, and this is again for all of you, most of you have some level of fundraising experience, this should be review for you. The case helps describe what makes your organization unique and special, explains what the problem is you're trying to solve and how you aim to solve it, and also will answer, what do you need? Like, what are you asking the person to do to help you solve this problem? How much money do you need? What other resources are you asking them to provide to help you address this problem, right? So we're going to do a little exercise. Again, you're going to get into groups of 3 this time, just to give you a little group to kind of discuss this with. And what I'd like you to do before you get into the groups of 3 is you're going to go back to that document, the slide deck. So Stephanie, if you could share the link again to the slide deck that had the Google Slides in it that people can edit and check out themselves. So make sure you have access to that. If you can't access that for some reason, let Avery know, and maybe we can figure out some other way to help you out, or maybe you could pair up with somebody in your group to kind of have them take notes for you. But we're going to have you answer in those slide decks at least 2 of these questions. You don't have to answer all of them, but at least 2 of these questions. So the questions are, who are you and what is your connection to this organization? So when you're going out and asking people for money, they're going to want to know, why are you asking for money for this organization? Are you a staff member? Are you a board member? Are you a client? Are you a member of the group, right? They're going to want to know what your connection is to this. Also, I think it's good to say in this part of the case for support, when you're talking to individuals on a one-on-one basis, the more kind of heart-centered reason you care about this work, right? So maybe you are directly affected by the issue that this organization cares about, right? If you have a group, for example, working with undocumented immigrants and you are an undocumented immigrant, if you feel like comfortable sharing that might be a really important part of making a connection to this donor about sharing that story, that part of your story, right? The second question is, why does your organization exist, right? There's tons of organizations, right? 1.5 trillion in the United States alone, tons of nonprofits. Why did your organization and the people that started yours think it was so important to start this group, right? What was the vision behind that? Why is your work important and what do you do? So they sound a little repetitive, but you'll see as you answer them, they really try to get you in deep in terms of like, what is the purpose behind what you're doing? Not just the list of the things that you do, and these are our programs and these are our achievements, but really what's the vision and what's the goal underneath those activities, right? Which really gets to the kind of heart of who your organization is and what makes it different from other organizations. So any questions about what we're going to talk about or what you're going to write about in your case for support slides? Does it make sense? Can I get a thumbs up? Make sure you're hearing me okay?
Makes sense. Thank you, Rona.
Okay, cool. Getting some thumbs up. So go ahead and get into your slide deck. And then I'm going to have Avery put you in. Let's do groups with 3, Avery, I think we said. Okay, so if people are done early, feel free to come back to the main room. No big deal. But yeah, we'll give you 15 minutes total in the breakout rooms.
And don't forget to turn your video on when you're talking to folks in breakouts.
Have fun. Welcome back, folks. And Tressa just joined us as well from Michigan with, I think some of our other colleagues are here. So welcome, Tressa. And Tressa, we just did a little exercise on coming up with a case for support, like a little quick way to talk about your organization in terms of fundraising. So yeah, I'd love to hear if anybody wants to share. Maybe we'll have like a few people share. Could be an answer to one or more of the questions. Maybe like a really brilliant part of your pitch or your case that you came up with that you're like, yes, you're really proud of it. Or because something could be something that you want to work on a little bit. You know, this is just a time to practice and, you know, kind of try things out. So it doesn't have to be perfect by any means, but would anyone like to share what they came up with in their reflection exercise?
Hi, I'm Kalina Irving from Missouri Healthcare for All. And I was just telling my group that I was recently able to take a different kind of training where we had to do a similar thing to introduce ourselves. And they challenged us to do a haiku-ish type pitch where you tried to do 5 words, 7 words, 5 words. And it was very similar to these questions. And they challenged us to do that because we're so passionate about this work that whenever someone asks us what we do, we start going off on tangents. And especially in the fundraising space, people are just like, okay, I just want to know, like, what's your pitch? What do you do? So especially like at tabling events and other stuff. And it was really difficult for me because I'm very loquacious, as you can tell right now. And so I just wanted to share that with everyone on this call to try to challenge yourselves, because it was an interesting exercise for myself, but it also helped me to really like narrow down and kind of solidify what we do. So it was really helpful also.
What a great idea. Can you write that in the chat, Kalina, just
Sure.
to have it documented? So, and I'm a writer and a poet too, so I appreciate the blending of the worlds here.
Yeah,
Keeping it succinct is really hard, right? So
it really is.
did
Yes.
you come up with a haiku for your thing today?
I tried to do it as succinct as possible. So, like for example, who are we? What is your connection? So, who are we? We're a statewide healthcare advocacy organization fighting for health justice across our state. Why does your organization exist? Because we believe healthcare and health insurance is a human right. Why is your work important? Because basically it was the same thing, because we believe it's a human right. And what do you do? We advocate and mobilize communities to fight for universal healthcare in Missouri.
Awesome. Great.
So that was a little more than what we had to do at the training, but you get the idea.
You could get some haiku out of that. There could be there's a haiku hiding in there somewhere. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. And yeah, please throw that idea of the haiku in the chat. I love it.
Okay.
Anybody else want to share what came up, or what you learned, what you came up with in your reflection? Or was it difficult? You can share that too. What was hard about it?
We'd love to hear your gems. Please share.
You can also put them in the chat if you don't feel like sharing verbally. That's totally fine too. And we're going to look at them later anyway. So I want to see what people came up with. And yeah, so let's go ahead and move forward. We have a little more content to cover before we end for the day, but thanks for trying that. And again, this is going to be stuff you can refer back to when you do the major donor training with Wanda in 2 weeks from today. So the second element of the 5 elements of strong individual donor fundraising is relationships. So not just, relationships, of course, are important in fundraising overall. The purpose of fundraising is to build relationships, really, but when we talk about individual donor fundraising, we're talking about it in a kind of a specific way and over multiple years, right? So in the beginning, when we are first meeting people who might want to be donors, we just want them to make a first gift, right? And so in fundraising, we call that acquisition, acquiring a donor, just having them make the first gift. It could be $10, doesn't have to be, really doesn't matter the amount, just that they made that commitment by committing some kind of gift to the organization, right? And then after they give us a first gift, hopefully we have some systems in place in our fundraising that we thank them right away, right? Thank before you bank. And we acknowledge that they made that gift, right? Then we have some time to kind of get to know them, right? So we might want to put them on our email list. We might want to invite them to events. All those activities between a donor making a first gift and potentially making a second gift are called, stewardship. Just taking care of the donor, taking care of them, making sure that they know what happened to the money that they gave to you, that you're stewarding that gift well. And then we ask them to give again, right? So we don't just ask once and then never ask again. Although some groups do that and they don't grow their donor base for very much. So we want to ask them to give again and continue to give, right? Some folks will give again, some folks won't, but our goal is to try to get as many people to be retained as donors, right? We call that donor retention. And it's natural for people to only give once and move on, but we're constantly trying to make sure that we're bringing new people in as well as asking current donors to continue to give, right? In between all of this, we're still, updating donors, informing them about the work, cultivating them as donors, as individuals. We might even ask them to fundraise for us. That's one way that you can cultivate donors to be more committed to your organization. I just want to take a little poll just briefly and say, how many people in your organizations that have donors are doing both of these things, are doing donor acquisition strategies? So you have activities that bring in new donors, as well as you're going back and asking those donors to give again every year. Just do a thumbs up or some kind of emoji to let me know. Are you doing already acquisition and retaining of donors? Are you doing some kind of ask every year that asks people to give who are new, but also asking people to give again? So I see 2 thumbs up and 1 thumbs down, which I'm assuming Kalina group does not do one of those things. Okay, so some people are. So yeah, there's a little bit of a science to this. It's not rocket science, it's not difficult, but we're trying to, again, build a relationship with these donors over time, right? So if I give to your organization at once $20 and then I never hear from you again, and then I hear from you maybe in 5 years, what's the likelihood you think that I'm going to want to give again? Maybe not very high, because I didn't hear anything from you for a long time. I don't know what happened to my money. But if I hear from you, really soon after with a thank you, and then I get regular updates, maybe 3 or 4 times a year from you, when it comes around for me to renew my gift the following year, I'm probably going to have a much better sense of who you are, what your organization is, and I'll probably make another gift, right? So the next step on this kind of ladder of engagement is upgrading donors. And what that really means is asking people who've been giving to your organization to increase their gift. And this is really where individual donor fundraising starts to make you more money, right? So it can feel very small, especially if you get large foundation or government grants. This kind of fundraising can seem like, well, what's the point of it? Like I'm not raising a lot of money, but you really have to stick with it for a while to see the benefit in terms of these upgraded donors. So someone like me might make a $50 gift to an organization coming in, and after 2-3 years, maybe I'm making a $150 gift or a $200 gift because you've asked me to give more. And when you multiply that by having 1,000 donors or 500 donors, you can see just with the math, that's going to be exponentially more money than you were getting from these donors in the very beginning. Because when people give a first gift, it's usually not very big, right? So we want to keep asking them to continue their support, but also increase their support to help us keep going, right? So then the last step on this ladder is the final gift of bequest, which we talked about earlier. Bequest is when someone leaves money to an organization in their estate or their will. So in some ways, it's the final act of trust that a donor has to an organization. It's not very likely that a donor would just come in off the street and know nothing about you and leave, part of their will to you. They would probably have had a relationship with you for a long time, right? And trust you and know that you do really good work. So it's not necessarily that getting a bequest is the goal of every relationship with a donor, but it's obviously that if we want to build a relationship with a donor over time, we want to have that as an option, right? We want to make sure that that's something that a donor might consider because we've done a really good job stewarding their gift and stewarding their giving and them as a person and involving them. So let me just stop there and see if just this concept kind of makes sense, if this is, this is something that you've seen before or something that's new. Anybody have questions about this or just comments about these different levels of engagement of donors over time? Or Stephanie, if there's anything you wanted to add?
No, the only thing about bequests I wanted to add is that people might leave you substantial assets, even if when they were living, they didn't have much disposable income, right? So there are many working class people around the country who own a home and they live on very limited income, but when they die, they can leave that home to a nonprofit. So don't think that bequests only come from rich people.
Yep, it's very true, very true. And the other thing too is that, in order to have like some people who become major donors or who give bequests, you actually start off with a much broader group of people, right? So when you're acquiring donors, it's not just like, let's just acquire the rich people or let's just acquire, well, one, you don't really know, right? Who's really wealthy and who has capacity or not. The other is that, those smaller gifts are important too, like they all add up. And so I think what I really love about fundraising is that it's a way for anybody to get involved. And then some people might move up this ladder and some people might not, but we have to give people the opportunity to do that. And if we don't, then we're kind of taking ourselves out of the game, right? By not offering them these opportunities to upgrade, to give again, to maybe volunteer as fundraisers, to be on our board, right? Those are all ways to keep people involved as donors, to make a final bequest or a planned gift, right?
Rona.
Yes.
Hi, this is Brenda. I'm with Mishwa along with Henry Ford. But this process that you're showing us, I kind of saw that work today in our meeting because I'm new to the board, and so we are in a in fundraising right now. So I can understand this because Tressa just talked us through it really earlier today. But also I wanted to mention too that talking about small donations, I had my grandson plays football. They always raise money in Texas. So he asked us to give money. So I told my granddaughter who's 10, I said, let's give part of your money to this fundraiser. And so she looked at me funny at first, and then she gave. I said, come on, just give like $5. It all counts. And so she gave $5. Well, she got mail the other day from Texas, and it was a thank you note for helping them to raise and make their quota. So she was excited. So next year, I'm sure that they have retained a donor and her donation might be more than $5 next year. So
right,
even starting there, it's like you said, it doesn't matter how small it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, those thank you notes mean a lot.
Yeah.
Also, when you say thank you or we appreciate your gift, that makes a big difference. I just wanted to comment.
Well, if the fundraisers have seen over, decades is that people make a first gift because they were asked, and they make a second gift because they were thanked, right? So the thank you in a lot of ways is such an important part of the retention process. And I think nowadays, because we're so bombarded with so many different kinds of requests and emails, like in some ways it's even more important. The thing like a very small, like paper thank you, which, if that's something you can have volunteers do or people do, because it can be hard to have capacity to do those kind of things for all donors. But if there's any way you can, not only does it give your volunteers or your board members a really good way to recognize the value of doing a thank you to a donor, but then it makes a big difference on the donor side, right? They feel really seen, they feel really valued, even for smaller gifts. So thank you, Brenda, for that story. I love it. your granddaughter's going to be a big donor someday.
That's right.
Start them young, right?
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments about this? Again, I'm sure this is a review for a lot of you who've had a lot of experience with fundraising. So in terms of relationships too, like there's lots of different people we can ask to be donors, right? Or fundraisers. So I always put donors and fundraisers together because I think people forget sometimes that your donors make some of your best fundraisers, right? They're people who already give to you. Hopefully if they have a good long relationship, they know a lot about your work. And I think it's good to offer them the chance to raise money for you, right? Whether that's online or through events. So that's something to just continue to think about whenever you're looking for people to expand your fundraising team. Just look at your list of donors, like who in your list of donors is someone that can maybe be a good fundraising volunteer. So of course, board members should be fundraisers, and we'll talk a little bit about the board and fundraising teams later. If you have grassroots members, alumni, volunteers, allies, friends, lots of different people can be donors and or fundraisers for your organization. So any other questions about relationships or any other stories people want to share about how they build relationships with donors over time? Okay, let's move on. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on these next few slides, but and this topic, I'm hoping that we're going to have a webinar specifically on this topic. Stephanie, I think I mentioned that to you. I'd like to do a workshop just on how to select the right strategy for your fundraising campaign, because there's so many different choices, and I think it can be kind of overwhelming for folks to decide. And we don't have time to go over that today, but just my overall guidance for folks is that it's important to select the right fundraising strategy for your goals and capacity. So thinking about what are we trying to achieve, how much money are we trying to raise, by when, and how much people power do we have, right? So you might have this idea to do a golf tournament or something, but you only have 2 volunteers who can really only do the work for a month, right? And unless one of them owns a golf course, a golf tournament's probably not the way to go, right? So really matching and coordinating your capacity with your goals. And sometimes we have to dial back the goals a little bit or increase the capacity a little bit. To me, that gets you the sweet spot of picking the right strategy. And then another thing to keep in mind is that the more personalized your ask, so the more personalized the way you're asking people for money, the more often you're probably going to hear them say yes. Yes, they're going to make a donation. So what does that mean? So these are some statistics that we've seen kind of play out over time in fundraising. So this is, again, probably review for some of you, but in-person asking where we're actually face-to-face or over Zoom or on a walk together somewhere in a meeting, if we've done our homework well, and this is a good prospect as a donor, about half the time that person's going to say yes to our fundraising ask, right? So it's a pretty high response rate. Whereas with a personal phone call, which is not face-to-face, or just on the phone call, or maybe a text, I'm sort of throwing this in there because this is my experience, but this is not borne out by research. So don't quote me on whether text really falls into this category, but because people text so much now, I think it's probably similar range of response. But a personal phone call from someone you know, right? If I'm a donor and someone I know, Stephanie calls me and has a conversation with me and says, Rona, I would like you to give to this organization. About a quarter of the time, the person's going to say yes, right? So lower than in-person ask, but still higher than things like email and that kind of thing. And then you can see the response rate goes down again for personal letter or email. There's no, sort of vocal exchange happening. There's no connection happening. It's all kind of flat, but still 10 to 15% of a response rate is still pretty good. And so just keep in mind the response rate is the number of times, the percent of time that someone says yes to the ask, right? And so it's important to think about how you're going to ask for money. If you have the capacity to do in-person asking or personal phone calls, then that can be a better way to get yeses, but obviously that takes more time. So we tend to reserve these kinds of asks for major donors or people who can make higher level gifts, right? Any questions about this before I move on? This all makes sense. And then these are the less personalized strategies, just to get a sense of like what the response rate is there. Phone or text bank, like just people who don't know these folks, making phone calls or texting them and asking them to make a donation. We can expect a 3 to 5% yes response. So 3 to 5% of the people that are called or texted will say yes. So if you have a list of 1,000 people, that'll be, 0.3 people or something like that. And then direct mail is obviously snail mail, paper mail, which some groups still do. The response rate is generally 0.5 to 1%. A mass email, an impersonalized mass email, 0.08%. So you can see how the response rate goes down very quickly. And so these strategies are generally used for acquisition, right? So if you have a big list or if you have access to a big list and you want to just contact those people very quickly, you send out a mass email to people and maybe you get 1%, right? Or maybe you get 5% of those people to make a donation because you don't have time to contact a list of 1,000 people one-on-one, right? And then when you get that group of donors from that initial ask, that initial acquisition strategy, then your next ask, which might be a renewal ask or an upgrade ask, is a more personalized ask, right? It's either phone call or a personal email or a text, from someone that they know. Does that make sense? Okay. Any questions about this? So again, we're hoping to do another webinar in the spring, maybe that goes deeper on these strategies and like, how do you really pick? Because you can get really creative, but you really need to start with like, what are your goals and what's your capacity? Any questions about these strategies or anything else so far?
I just have to say that this makes me feel a lot better. Because I thought we were doing something wrong, and it was just that we weren't doing anything wrong except choosing the wrong strategy. So thank you for these numbers, because that really helps. And then also, I was telling Leslie, who was my partner in the first one, I'm rather new to fundraising, and so I had never thought about then stepping up, like, so doing a mass email or direct mail, seeing who you get, and then moving to the next strategy. So I was getting a little overwhelmed, but then when you said that, I was like, oh, well, duh. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem. That's why it's important when you're planning a campaign or a strategy to say, what are we trying to get out of this? Are we trying to get new donors? Are we trying to get our current donors to give again? Because you would do that a little differently, right? Like, yeah, and then it depends on your capacity. Do we have capacity to call people? Do we have a team of people to actually do personal phone calls? If you don't, then it's not ideal to do like the phone bank or like a mass email, but maybe that's what you have capacity to do. And it's better to do some kind of ask than not to do anything, right? So it's not, there's no cookie cutter way to do it. That's why I want to do like a whole workshop just on this, but thank you for sharing that. Yeah, you probably were just like, yeah, just choose the right strategy. So now you know, and now you can experiment with what's a better strategy for the goals that you had in mind, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Anybody else have any questions or comments? Things you'd like to share?
Comment from Jennifer. Jennifer, maybe you want to speak to this, what you wrote.
Sure. So like on average, I've read this at some point, that on average it directs, like donor acquisition works sort of like marketing acquisition. It takes on average about 5 touches in order to catalyze reaction from somebody. So you figure, and that it works best if you're kind of hitting them in multiple ways, because it suddenly feels like, oh, this is just everywhere. Why am I not doing this? But I don't know about anybody else who's on here who's been doing this for a while, but like for me, the biggest hang up as a small org and a 1-person team is always capacity. Like always the manpower issue and the how can we beg, borrow, and steal additional, time from volunteers or time from our comms department or things like that to kind of coalesce something together into, I'm using big buzzy words today. I have a gala eating my brain, pardon me. How do we bring all that together to kind of coalesce into a strategy that makes sense and works for the moment? And exactly what you're saying, like think about what's your end goal and then plan backwards.
Yeah. And I'm a big fan, and my clients always love it when I say this. So, and this is helpful to people, of less is more. So if you only do 2 fundraising things a year, but you do them really well, that's much better than trying to do 5 and not doing half of them hardly at all, So I think sometimes, we try to just do something and we feel this pressure, especially when we look at how bigger organizations are fundraising. They're always asking, well, they have like huge development departments that they can crank out this stuff on a daily basis, right? Well, if you don't, well, what do you have? You have good relationships, hopefully strong relationships with your base. You have probably maybe more name recognition with certain people that already know you. Like, what is it that you have, right? What are your assets? So we'll explore that in the workshop later. But even now, when you're thinking about any planning you're doing between now and the end of the year, try to lean on like what you have versus what you don't have, right? And maybe that just means we scale back. We try not to do too much, try to do what we can do really, really well. And that also gives your volunteers and your staff a really good experience of fundraising, which is really important, I think, so that they want to do it again, right? Because if they have a bad experience, they're not going to want to keep doing it. And it's just going to feel kind of not fun. And most people don't want to do fundraising anyway. So we need to make it something that they're going to enjoy and feel a sense of accomplishment, right? Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Is there anything in the chat going on there?
Nothing new.
Okay, cool. Cool. So the teamwork thing we talked about a little bit. This kind of fundraising requires, a team of people, because the more people you have on your team, the more people who can be asking for money, who can be following up, who can be, organizing events, that kind of thing. This is a little graphic I came up with that kind of shows like what I find is like what I consider like the ideal of what a good, healthy fundraising culture looks like in an organization, which is that everybody participates in fundraising in some way. So that means board, staff, volunteers, members, everybody in some way participates in fundraising. Doesn't mean they do it all the time, but maybe like once a year at the end of your fundraiser or during the gala, everybody's doing some kind of asking, right? Fundraising is talked about regularly. So it's not only talked about like twice a year or when you do fundraising campaigns, but it's something that's, kind of not a taboo topic to discuss, right? There's a sense of belonging to a team. So if people are doing fundraising, they know they're not doing it by themselves. They don't feel isolated. They know that they can talk to somebody and get help if they want to. And that's really important. And that there's some sense of collective ownership of fundraising, right? So that there's not just like, this is the development director's thing to raise the budget. It's like, no, it's all of our job to like make sure that this gala or this fundraising campaign is a success. And we all have different roles in that, but it's up to all of us to make this happen. So to me, these are the elements of what makes a healthy fundraising culture. And it takes a while to get there. I don't know if I know any organization who's quite there yet, maybe like one or two, but it's something to kind of shoot for, right, and consider in your work.
Rona, can I just add I know we're running a long time, but something I've just realized recently working with a group, that when people hear this idea that you have to talk about fundraising regularly, I think it sets in some kind of panic, like, oh my God, do I have to be asking everybody I know for money all the time? To me, it's also just about acknowledging that it costs money to run your organization. So it could be just saying, we had this great program success I want to tell you about, or share in an e-newsletter or something. And thanks to our community, we were able to carry it out. Like it's just acknowledging it takes money to do this work. Not that I'm necessarily asking you for money right now, but I'm acknowledging the cost of doing business, right? We hear about social movements all the time. How much do we hear about the fact that people pass the hat in a church meeting to raise money for some activism, right? You don't hear that. You just hear about the activism itself. So
yeah,
this is my plug.
Yeah, definitely. And then that's like external, and then I'm even thinking internal communication. Like there should be a regular update on fundraising at every staff meeting. It could take 5 minutes, just so that it's never like this mystical thing that holds all this power. Nobody really knows how it happens, because to me, that's dangerous, right? When people sort of think it sort of happens because magical elves pop out of the ground and make the money come, that takes all our power away. And it's also just not true, right? Like people actually make this happen and you can be part of that, right? So yeah, it's not all or nothing. It's not like all we do is fundraising. Of course not. It's just that we make it something that's part of our work and an integral part of our work, just like anything else is, right? So thank you for that. Okay, just the last couple of things and then we're going to release you. So infrastructure obviously is a huge part of fundraising, especially individual donor fundraising. Again, kind of different than foundation fundraising, maybe kind of similar to government funding, because I know government funding requires a lot of documentation. But donor fundraising really requires you to have adequate staffing and systems to track donor information and really be able to analyze it over time, right? So it's not enough just to have like donor records, but like who's going back and looking at those and seeing, okay, this person hasn't given in a couple of years. We need to roll them into our campaign to get people who gave last year, but not this year, to give. Or this person, was a longtime donor and then got asked to be taken off the list. What's going on there? Maybe we need to have a conversation with that person, right? So there's lots of different pieces of this that I think are often very ignored or not given serious due, and they can cost some money, right? But they also, once they're up and running, once you have a really strong CRM or database, once you have really good like digital or print visuals, like assets, photos, especially now in this day and age, you need to have good photos. It's not a make or break, but it really helps a lot to have good visual assets to show on social media and in emails and that kind of thing. And then regular monitoring and analysis of the data that you have, all that really can move your fundraising program forward very, very efficiently and quickly. And especially for small groups, I think it's really important because we're often, I hear small groups often talk about, we don't have any major donors, we need major donors, but they've never actually looked at their current donor list and done any research on who those donors are, who they've given to, what other organizations they've given to. And I guarantee you have major donors lurking in your current list. You just are sort of pretending, or acting like you don't. And actually, is it okay to mention the prospect research piece, Stephanie? Is that something we can mention here?
Sure.
Yeah, so through this project, you have access to some level of prospect research. So if you wanted information on a particular donor, say, someone who's been giving you $500 a year and you wonder if they have capacity to give much larger gifts, you can ask your consultant to look up that person through we have access to a prospect research database, which is pretty robust, and they can try to find out whether that person gives to some other organization at a much larger amount, right, or gives to political campaigns at a much larger amount. And so that gives you a sense of, you might be able to go back to that person and ask for much more than you've been getting from them before, because you have this, additional information about their capacity to give. So that's a really useful service. I hope you take advantage of that. And again, just checking with your consultant about that if that's something you're interested in doing. So that's all I'm going to say today in terms of like content. Is there any other question? Donor search is what we have, Jennifer. Yeah, so it's a little bit different than iWave. Yeah. Donor search.
Although I think if you have iWave, Jennifer, I don't know that donor search is necessarily better. I wouldn't, right? I think they're comparable. Oh, you're on mute.
I priced them all out at for an old job, and yeah, they all pulled similar but slightly different, and depending on how creepy one wants to get, what one needs to find. Some things are easier in one than the other, but just mostly curious.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Great. So any final questions?
Rona, you got muted somehow.
Sorry. Any final questions or comments? Anything that you didn't get to ask today, or that you had as a question early on that didn't get addressed in our time today? It could be about this training, can be about the series. Anything else we can chat about before we end?
Tressa wrote, I was here just a short time, but it was phenomenal.
Thank you,
Thanks, Tressa. I do want to add that Ambar, who some of you met, our project manager for the Fundraising for Health Justice Project, was going to be sending out an evaluation just right after this training, because it's really important for us to get your feedback on how to improve future trainings. But she's out sick, and hopefully we'll get that to you tomorrow or at the latest on Monday. And I really hope you'll fill it out. Thank you. And Rona will tell you what the upcoming trainings are.
Yeah, so there's the next session, which I mentioned a few times, is on personal solicitation and major gifts. So actually doing asks one-on-one, which tends to be the scariest thing for people. So we're just going to throw you in there and make you practice it. It's also the most powerful, right? You get 50% response rate if you do a one-on-one ask. So Wanda Scott's going to be doing that one. I'm going to be the lead trainer for all the sessions, which just means I'm going to be present at all of them and will kind of like help be like a through line through all the trainings. So if there's like a comment I remember somebody saying in the first training that seems relevant to bring up again in the third training, I'll try to make those connections. And, we'll kind of remind you too, like some of the things that may come up in Wanda's training or Miguel's training or Beth's training later on, reminding you that that's something we talked about in the beginning, trying to help you, again, make those connections to the different content you're receiving. And we're totally getting that this is a lot of information to be thrown at, to throw at you, and we don't expect you to get it all like in the first go. So, the repetition, I think, and the kind of reinforcement of the different trainings, I think will be helpful in terms of being able to retain it and be able to use it. One last thing I will say, if you have time, in the slide deck that I sent you earlier, and Stephanie, if you could just put the link in there again, I did want to ask people, what's one thing you want to bring back to your organizations from today, if anything? If there's a certain concept or question or tool or piece of information that you find helpful that you want to bring back to your group and share with them, or bring back and apply in some way, if you could share that in the slide deck and just the last two slides, I would really appreciate that. So yeah. Well, if there's nothing else, then thank you so much for being here. I'll stick around for a few more minutes in case anyone has any final questions. Otherwise, and actually, let me do this. I want to share with you also the let's see, I have it, a list of trainings for next time, for the rest of the session. Oh, I can't find it now, Stephanie. Do you know if you have it, Stephanie? I thought I had it up here, but it's disappeared.
No, but I can just say that the session after Wanda, so they were going to be weekly, but next week is a Voices for Health Justice, some other convening you're invited to. We didn't want to compete with that. So the next session is September 29th, is that right? And the
Yeah.
one after that will be October 6th, which will be on special events, which I know some of you are in the throes of. And foundations, that'll be focused on foundation fundraising and special events, two very different topics. The final session on the 13th of October will be planning, fundraising, creating an annual fundraising plan and building a strong fundraising team. Oh, and Rona, you found it. Okay. Yeah, and we'll send you reminders of all these too.
Yeah, so you can see, there's these first two sessions, and then the next two are going to be in October, demystifying foundation funding and the best use of special events, as Stephanie said, and then building a fundraising team and creating a fundraising plan. So that's it. Hope to see you in the future. All right, thanks. I'll stay around for questions if people have anything else they want to talk about. Otherwise, we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Bye.
Take care.
We got some nice comments in the chat. Can you see them, Rona?
Thanks all. See you next time.
Thanks, Kalina.
Take care. Be safe.